Hello and welcome to the Miskatonic Playhouse. I'm John Hedge, the backstage manager, and we are, of course, back for week 2 of NaNoWriMo with the great Heinrich Moore. How are you feeling today, Heinrich?
I'm all right. I have a big personal work project that is now behind me, so I am really looking forward to over the next 20 days or so to really get stuck into the project that I've kind of been brainstorming around.
That sounds fantastic. And how has your second week been going? Because the first week, the first couple of days you said went really, really terribly. Has it been
Mm.
a pretty slow slog as well?
Yeah, it has been slow, but for me, for my own personal project, that's sort of fine, right? Because it's a brainstorming project. So I am not looking at the end of this month to have a complete product. I will frankly be excited if at the end of this month I have a clear direction that I am going in from having done the groundwork to sort of get my thinking out and know what's possible in the long term because my projects, they take 1 to 2 years to write, right? So I
Yeah.
know this is a long process for me, and I am just at the very beginning of it. But how has it been for you? Have you kept up the momentum?
Yeah, I've been doing pretty good. I'd go almost as far to say as I'm having a slight problem in that I'm becoming a little bit obsessed.
Oh,
So my project is going really well. I'm really excited. I ran a playtest of it just a couple of days ago, and I got some really, really great feedback from the table, which is always really nice. They also actually gave me some tips and thoughts on which I think can improve it, which is even better because sometimes you finish a playtest, they're all like, great, and they say nothing.
right.
But one of the things that I'm very aware of is that while the writing and planning and creation is done, some project creep is coming along, both in terms of there's a couple of subplots that I'd love to expand on and do more with. And there's also just the sheer volume of art and flowcharts and handouts that I could put into this to really bulk it out a little bit.
Well, let's hover on that idea because you're using some terminology here, project creep. Now that has a specific meaning for me. I suspect it
Mhm.
has a slightly different meaning to you, and I expect many of the folks listening have their own understandings of what that means. So what is your definition of project creep?
So I think for me, when I say project creep, I think of I had an idea of a scenario that was fairly self-contained that would be this length and would involve these scenes. And by playing it through a little and by developing it, suddenly something that I thought would maybe take about 20 hours of work is starting to look like, oh, I'll add a couple of subplots here, I'll add a few extra handouts here, and that 20-hour becomes 30, becomes 40 hours worth of potential work to be done.
And I've been there where at the end of that process, after you've put in those 40 hours, you run it again, and what folks say is, well, this just needs to be slimmed down.
So how do you handle it? When is it a good idea to allow yourself to indulge your creative gremlin and add all those hours into the project? And when do you maybe need to say, stop, this is enough?
I mean, it comes down to what your ultimate goals are with the hobby, right? If you are looking at some kind of cost benefit analysis, like you are going to make X amount of money of this project, and so you really should only spend Y amount of hours on it, then I think it's a serious issue, right? You really need to discipline yourself and keep that project creep to a minimum, given what your ultimate goal is. Now, I don't think that's the goal for that many folks in this community, in the Miskatonic repository community. For my part, for example, often the goal is developing skills. So
Mhm.
with one of my scenarios, The Great Trap, I spent hours trying to learn how to draw, right? Because I wanted to create like a Yithian. I wanted to draw a Yithian. I wanted to paint it, and I got all the accoutrements. I was working on my desktop, and at the end of the day, I applied some kind of like terrible sketch filter that made it look nothing like what I had originally drawn because I didn't get there. I didn't get end up with a product that I was happy with. But I didn't consider that wasted time.
No.
I was very happy to develop those skills, even if they didn't take me all the way to where I wanted those skills to be, including because I so much more appreciate what that process is like for those
Yeah.
artists that I work with. Layout, often the same. I'll just conclude maybe by talking about my current project, which is in the brainstorming phase, where I'm playing around with this idea of a guide to monsters. And so I'm looking at a lot of other products that are like randomized tables of rolling up monsters, both in the Malleus Monstrorum and also in other systems, Lamentations of the Flame Princess, things like that, and going, is this what I want to do, and is my vision of what such a book would look like sort of doable. And I was thinking, as you were describing project creep, that it's not always a negative thing, especially not in the
Yeah.
brainstorming phase, where one of the key decision points that I have is it a guide to monsters, where the focus is on monsters, or is the focus on scenario design? Because to me, those go hand in hand. The monster
Yeah.
serves the scenario. And so I'm finding that a lot of the things I'm thinking about in terms of a guide to monsters would also be appropriate in a scenario design book. And how do I want to navigate that? And it's possibly project creep, but for me, it's okay right now.
Yeah.
Welcome your thoughts.
Well, yeah, I think you're right. So project creep, when you're talking about it in a system development or software development surroundings, can often have a very negative connotation. But I think when you are in a creative industry, especially if you're in a creative industry where most people's interest is getting better, it has a lot of value. So if I spend 50 hours mucking around on Affinity Designer and become much better at developing art, that's a skill I want. It's not only a skill I want because I like writing scenarios, actually. I found that my skills in Affinity have become incredibly useful with my job because I'm an entrepreneur with a small business. And so the skills I'm developing here have literally positively impacted my life. So, in those terms, if you're having fun and getting fulfilled, if the project expands in size because you're learning a new skill, this is in fact great news. I think it's something really, really valuable. If it's not fulfilling, if it's boring you, if you're hating it, if you can't get started on anything else because it's in the way, maybe consider publishing something that's not quite as good as you can potentially create, and then go and create something else. Or maybe put it down and come back to it in 6 months. Again, we're creators, we're doing this to get fulfilled. At Miskatonic Playhouse, I think it's really important we keep coming back to the idea that we're here to become better creators and to support ourselves in developing our abilities because we enjoy that process. And that doesn't mean we have to enjoy every bit of it. Some bits of creation are boring.
Mhm.
Editing mostly sucks. But you still want to feel fulfilled by the end of it. You still want to drive to create things. And if what we're doing leads us to that, I think it's really positive.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just conclude by saying, one of the potential positive aspects of project creep is figuring out why you are experiencing project creep. Because in some cases, it's possible that the reason you're engaging in project creep is you're not as passionate about your original idea as you thought you were, and you're gravitating towards what you actually find interesting. And rather than this being a part of your existing project, it might actually just be the project you really want to pursue. And that is incredibly valuable knowledge.
Yeah. I suppose we can probably conclude on the bit of pursue what you're passionate about. Again, you're here to be fulfilled and enjoy yourself. So try your best to find the things that fulfill you and don't torture yourself doing stuff that you don't enjoy. Beautiful thing to finish on. Heinrich, as always, pleasure to talk with you. Um,
Likewise.
we'll see you all next week for week 3.